Welcome to another edition of Going the Distance with Go Long. I'm Jill Consor Beck, founder of Go Long, and I am here with Dr. Karin Moore. Go Long is an accountability coaching service that focuses on women over 40. Whether you are trying to make time for that side hustle, trying to get to the gym more, or trying to make sure that you're being more present for the people who matter most and you don't think you have the time, Go Long is here to help. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Karin. And I'm so excited because our paths crossed at Microsoft and wanted to work together, but it never happened. But I just was always a fangirl of just like how you led and how just like plain spoken and direct you are and you were at that
Thank
time.
you.
So,
Thank
Karin,
you.
welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. That's such a great introduction, and I'm humbled, Jill. And I just want to start with, yes, we met in 1 hour a long time ago, and I have to say over 15 years maybe at this point.
Definitely. Definitely.
And in that 1 hour, I thought she's too good for this job and told you that, I'm pretty sure. Um, and we didn't get a chance to work together, but look at the power of women who click and support each other for the next 15 years. You don't have to have a deep, meaningful decades of working together to find people or your people. So I'm so grateful that we continue to stay in each other's orbit and support each other. And, I continue to support you as well. So thank you for having me. It's really a pleasure. I've been looking forward to this conversation for, you know, all month.
Well, I appreciate that. So, Karin, tell us how you got here because obviously we're talking about our time at Microsoft, but you're not
Yeah.
doing that anymore.
No, I'm not. And when I was there, I was very happy, and it's still one of the best lucky events of my life. But in preparation for getting to Microsoft, I actually went and got an undergrad in engineering, thinking I would do engineering, like my dad. And I worked for the City of LA, Department of Water and Power, in the field. And after doing that for a few years, I decided to get my MBA in my fifth year of working out of college, and DWP was great. They paid for it. And that led me to a career in software. It also made me meet my husband, so I'm really grateful for that degree. It really paid itself 10 times over. So I pivoted to a career in software, which that made me work in places like Microsoft and Optum and Intuit and Teradata. And I loved it. I loved every type of role that I took, largely in program management, because that has an affinity for my personality, which is all about organizing and orchestrating, getting people to communicate with each other. And so when I did that for a couple of decades, at some point during COVID, I decided, you know what, this is enough. I'm not really learning anymore. I had reached senior executive level. And something clicked in me that the harder I actually had this naive belief that the higher up you go, the easier things will get. And it was exponentially more difficult. There is actually a lot less women.
I think that's a huge myth that you think
It
that the further
is
up you go, it's going to get easier. And
because
yeah,
you
that
have
was my experience at
people
Wells.
and you can delegate
Yeah.
and now, but you worry about it, even the things you delegate. So
Yeah.
I think from a worry and risk perspective, I realized that during COVID, I was doing 17-hour days and I had a huge team, and still I felt like something wasn't right anymore. I didn't have that joy that I had had for decades of my career. And so I decided, you know what, I need to do something different. And I was really fascinated with I'll call it the plight of women in STEM. And I wanted to go study it at really, truly at an academic level, understand the theories of leadership, understand change and change management. So I applied to and got into Pepperdine's Global Leadership and Change program, PhD. And I have to credit my sister because my sister also got her doctoral degree at USC in her 50s. So, I had a role model right there in my family.
That's
Like, we don't,
amazing.
just because you're in your 50s doesn't mean you don't continue education. And a lot of my cohort members also were in that 40 to even 60 age range because people can't take your education away. And this was really a matter of growth, personal growth, and a little bit of, you know, trauma therapy, if you will, of like understanding why was it so hard for me as a female leader in STEM to feel successful. So after I got my degree, I was invited back to be a fellow and to teach. And that was last year, which I enjoyed thoroughly. I've continued to write and co-author book chapters, and extended my research in my fellowship year to specifically Black women and Latinas in STEM, because my PhD was overarchingly women in STEM. It actually became children and women, girls and women in STEM when I finally was, wrapped it up, because it begins in childhood. But last year was all about Black women and Latinas in STEM. And then I took a little bit of summer off. And as I had a death in the family and gave myself the grace to, I think it's been about 7 weeks where I've just said, you know what, work will always be there. Right now, I need to focus on myself and my family. And now here we are. You're really my first foray back into being, you know, in the game, if you will, because I really needed that space to, grieve. And I will continue to grieve, but at least I can have a normal conversation. And so it's a delight to be here. That's my story.
Well, yeah, grief is not a linear process.
Right.
And, that's just it's something that we don't spend enough time dealing with.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of like people who kick the can down the road.
Yep.
And I find that comes back
Mm-hmm.
and in some very unhealthy ways.
Correct.
So, I hope you continue to take the time that you need, especially,
Thank you.
as certain firsts happen.
Yeah.
Um, so
Thank you.
so let's talk a little bit about, your dissertation,
Mm-hmm.
of which, you interviewed me for. I
Yeah.
volunteered. You did a solicitation on LinkedIn, and I volunteered because I felt like I had a story to tell
Mm-hmm.
around my experience being in STEM. So, I mean, I was in investment banking for 10 years, and then I was in tech for 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
And there are a lot of really empowering and great times, and there are a lot of shitty times
Yep.
with
Yep.
that, which I think that, probably something you can relate to. But maybe we could talk a little bit about your research, go a little bit deeper in terms of kind of how it started and kind of how it evolved, and we'll
Mm-hmm.
we'll take it from there.
Yeah. Thank you. So while I was working in corporate America, I still had this perspective of if I shape shift this way, or if I talk this way, or if I act this way, things will click. And I was noticing men getting promoted past me. And I was, in the high potential program, I was always getting really exceptional performance reviews, and something just didn't seem right. And so one of the first things I noticed in my PhD research was the concept of systemic um, events or policies or patriarchal viewpoints that are built in to systems like hiring, promotions, recruiting. These things I didn't have a full appreciation for until I started doing the research and started seeing that, by the way, we have been wringing our hands about women and girls in STEM for decades. This is not even a new topic. But of course, when we're busy building our homes and lives and careers, we're not coming up and doing research. But the research goes back to the 70s. STEM is not a monolith. We have different challenges in physics, as we do in engineering, as we do in healthcare. And even in healthcare, where the proportions are much closer to 50-50, and in, for example, nursing, more like 70% female, 30% male. In leadership, you start seeing men, even though the population that is growing through the ranks are largely women. So something systemic happens as a barrier that holds some things that hold women back from promoting into leadership. And that was really the nut I wanted to crack. And I started my research, with a bias, I'll be honest. I have a set of lived experiences myself. I've been very lucky. I've had amazing managers, male and female. I've also had some duds in there. And lucky for me, I didn't have my first really bad manager until about 20 years into my career. And I just didn't understand what was going on because everybody had been so pure and everybody had been so supportive leading up to that moment. So I just thought it was a personality conflict. And so I tried to shapeshift to adjust to their style, which I kept giving the benefit about that it's style, but it really wasn't style. It was sexism. There was a deep rooted belief that women don't belong in the workplace by this particular manager. And one of the giveaways, and that, you realize when you're this far away from it, was like, oh, that was right there in front of me, is when he said, "I'm really lucky my wife doesn't have to work." And I was like, huh, that seems like a really odd thing to say to a female direct report. Okay. I love working. So it's never been like I mean, I stayed home with my children 2 years to have them back to back. And I have to be honest, I was not mentally stimulated. I love my children. They came out great. But I think partially they came out great because they saw me, getting up, doing something with myself every day. Not that stay-at-home moms don't, but the ones who enjoy it, sure. The ones who don't, like me, love working. So it was really an odd thing to say. Anyway, to wrap that question up, I think the shocking part was the systemic nature. And there are many, many barriers. We're talking everything from core built-in beliefs that girls and women aren't as good in math and science. And that has been, promoted by people like Larry Summers of Harvard president fame publicly. I mean, that's shameful. And here we are, doing our level best, but that bias is built in. If somebody has been told all their life girls aren't good in math, they're not going to be likely to be putting your name on a promotion list.
Yeah. I think the other thing that we can also get into is that I tell this to people who I've mentored in the past, is that if there's a job description that has 10 qualifications required, if a woman is applying, if they don't hit 9 out of 10,
Yeah.
they're still like skeptical, where a guy will apply if they have 3 or 4,
100%.
right? And I tell that to people, and I tell it to some of my clients too, that you have to think about, like, to get 10 out of 10, even in this job market right now, which is admittedly an employer's job market as opposed to an employee's job market.
Yep.
You're gonna miss, like you're gonna swing and miss on 100% of the swings you don't take. Like you're not gonna do it.
Yep.
And I think there's also that, like, oh, we have to be perfect in order to apply for the role, when in fact there are so many instances of men applying to roles that they didn't even have remotely the same amount of qualifications for as the woman does. And then they get the role and everyone's like, what are you talking about? And that even happened with a startup I invested in. I mean, I think to me that was so galling because I'm sitting there, I'm an angel investor. I feel like I have, some kind of seat at the table, not in terms of day-to-day management, but in terms of just some level, a voice and some influence. And the founder hired a guy who was not remotely qualified for the role. And it was a C-level role, very critical. And didn't even check. The only box he checked was that he was a friend and someone he had worked with in the past.
Yep.
And I said to the founder, I'm like, why didn't you reach out to me? Because if you couldn't find people, I know plenty of people of all the genders who could fill this role for you.
Yep.
And I got him to admit that he didn't even try to look. And I was just like apoplectic.
Yeah. Yep. Happens every day.
Happens every day. But it was like
all day.
I was like that person who was like, I'm here. I have an investment stake in this company, and it still happened.
Well, and I think there's a big responsibility that we also, women and men, but women, I'll be honest, I've also been disappointed that we're not pulling each other up either.
Hmm.
And those were the things I wasn't tuned to until I started doing my research, the queen bee syndrome, where women who do reach the higher levels don't have either a minute or any care to look back and say, okay, I need to make sure there's succession plans that include men and women. I need to make sure there are succession plans, or I'm not going to bow to the pressures of my CEO hiring his best golf buddy when there's an opening, when that person is deeply not qualified to be, running an engineering team. And when you have people like that take leadership roles, then the stock suffers. I mean,
Yeah.
that is like, I'm not even making this up, but this is just lived experience. But I think that you and I are doing very similar work. We're going at it from different angles,
Hmm.
but we're really at the end of the day trying to promote women so they stay in the workforce, so they have a chance to be financially independent, whether they're
Right.
married or not. Because at the end of the day, I see, I'm on a bunch of different retirement groups, trying to like mentally prepare for someday when I do retire. And there's so many women who have to stay in bad relationships because they didn't have these opportunities, or they were pushed out or had to take time off for, elder care or child care, and weren't able to get themselves back in to earn the social security or earn some kind of an income to be independent. I mean, gray divorces, it was one of the things that I put in my PhD was gray divorces are the highest, fastest growing divorces where women are leading the charge of wanting their independence because they're in bad relationships. And my committee said, why are you putting this in there? Why is it related? I said, oh, I see such a clear
Yeah.
relationship between STEM,
Hmm.
highest paying jobs, women getting to those highest paying jobs because they want to, having the opportunities to stay in them so that they can earn an income, so that when it is time, if it comes to that, they stay in relationships because they want to be, not because they have to be. So I made the case and kept it in the PhD, was like, this is a financial decision for me promoting women in STEM. Yes, it's hard, but you would pick your hard. You want, as I tell my kids, adult kids, pick your hard. You want your hard up front or do you want your hard later? Because life's
Yeah.
hard.
Yeah. Life's hard. So much there because the first person who I know who went through a gray divorce, it was initiated by the wife,
Yeah, almost
and
always.
she was in STEM at the time.
Mhm,
She's someone who I still continue to look up to.
mhm,
But I talk about optionality and agency in my
mhm,
coaching because
mhm.
ultimately that's what I'm trying to give you by creating the time for you to do the things that you want to be doing, whether it's that side hustle that may be built into something else or whether it's being more present for your family. I'm trying to give you options,
Mhm.
right? As opposed to being in a situation where you can't break away from that. And I
Right.
think that people don't talk enough about the fact that it's like you're trying to save for retirement. Okay, sure. But really, what you're trying to do is to give yourself options for whatever comes up
Yep.
that you can adapt and adjust to whatever comes your way, especially as being members of the sandwich generation,
Yep.
people living longer. So the sandwich generation is actually expanding,
Yep.
right? Because
Yep.
you have parents now living, well into their 80s and
Mhm.
90s, and
Yep.
I'm thankful that my parents and my in-laws are still around,
Mhm.
right? But that means that there's a longer caretaking period as
Mhm.
well,
Absolutely. And I mean, how blessed are we that we have our parents, knock on wood,
right?
and at the same time, we're also aging with our partners. We're
Right.
also watching and launching our children for some of us who've chosen to have kids. At the same time, we are self-caring. And I love when you and I talk offline, we always have a bent to our health and, you know, caring for our bodies so that we
Yeah.
are not a burden on somebody later, which is its own half a job, is going through our aging gracefully, strongly, healthily. Um, and I feel like women, we need money for that.
Yeah.
Supplements are not free. Your exercise gym membership is not free. So one of the things when I've had the honor of speaking at the National Student Leaders Conference for the American Association of University Women, one of the things I tell the young women is money's a really amazing thing and powerful thing. I do not espouse to money doesn't buy you happiness. In
Right.
fact, research shows that up to like $88,000 or used to be 77, but they've adjusted for inflation. Money will buy you absolutely happiness. We're talking at the billionaire level where it may not buy you
Right.
happiness, but by that point, you better have figured out you're happy. But for people, normal, working people, you will need money and a lot more of it than you realize. So one of the things that, not only do I love STEM because of the innovation angle of it and how it stretches your brain, but like these are the highest paying jobs.
Yeah.
Why shouldn't we have a piece of that pie?
I find that there's certain tangential occupations. You
Hmm.
could say like being a lawyer, like working in a law firm is one, and even, like working in finance,
Yep.
right? I feel like those are tangential. Obviously, STEM, medical is included in, science and
Yeah.
technology, even though it's kind of different than tech.
Hmm.
Did you cover any of those types of occupations, or were you sticking more traditional tech in your PhD?
I actually covered STEM.
Hmm.
Made mention that a lot of these challenges we see in Wall Street. There are 5 specific finance subfields in the Wall Street realm in finance that actually one of my peers is doing the analysis of and getting
Hmm.
her PhD in. Wall Street and law have a lot of common barriers because they're also very male dominated.
Yeah.
And we see attrition and harassment and the lack of women in leadership that we see in STEM. Now, STEM high tech is a subfield of STEM,
Hmm.
and we see the more like gaming is even more male dominated than you
Sure.
would find maybe in, Windows or Office. And the root of the sexism, the more male dominated it gets, the more locker room talk there is, the more microaggressions there are, the less minorities you find. And this is like where I think the two that you've mentioned, the law and finance, we see a lot of common denominators there.
So let's talk about the survey a little bit more. You went in, as you said, with your bias, you owned that.
Yep.
What were, say, three of the major takeaways that you'd want people to understand from your research?
Yeah, one, the sexism starts early. So if you have a child, a woman, a girl that has an affinity towards math and science, and studies do show that they're equal, girls and boys' interests are equal. It's not until they get into, elementary school, sometimes as early as kindergarten, where you start seeing that self-consciousness about asking questions when things get hard. They're not as bold. And frankly, the boys are already getting conditioned at home to think girls are not as smart, girls don't have that talent for math and science. And so, first takeaway is you want to give girls as much opportunity, as much support. Research shows that the father's interest in a girl's interest in STEM is such a success criteria for sticking it out and retention. A father's participation in like robotics, a girls' robotics team where the dads are involved, skyrockets interest and stickiness. So let's begin at the girls. If you want a successful female leader later, encourage them. And this is counselors, teachers,
Right.
parents, uncles, everybody. Second one is in college. Like, I didn't have my first female professor until my PhD in my 50s and a
Wow.
liberal arts PhD. So what does that tell you about? And I went to a state school, so I didn't even
Mhm.
go to like a, elite, they keep everybody out. They just weren't there,
Right.
especially like in engineering. I mean, not a single female teacher. So we crave and we look for role models in our college years. And if those role models don't exist, the minute you are harassed in a lab, you're like, you know what? I'm done. I'm going to go study something where this is just not so pervasive in every, place that I, it's bad enough. Like
Right.
I've had issues being followed at Cal State Northridge to my car, kind of having to call security, pull the lever. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, I
But
do know what you mean.
yeah. And those things like, okay, one, that's not happening in the lab, but when it's also happening in the lab, then you're like, I'm done. I'm going to go somewhere where I'm going to learn among women. So that's one of the other ones is like, we need support in college because we already lose. They enter freshmen, already low numbers enter as women and freshmen in college, even less graduate. And now when they graduate, they get harassed in the workplace or they don't get promoted. And then you get the gender pay gap where I love this study where they looked at millennial women and millennial men, their tax records, same college, same job entry. 3 years later, the women are already making less.
Well, you know what happened at Salesforce, right? So Mark Benioff, he went and did commissioned this whole study, apparently, and he wanted to like basically fix the gender gap at
Hmm.
Salesforce. And so he fixes it. And he basically does all the equalization, normalization, right? A year later, he expects to go look at the data and see that everything is, progressing on the same path in terms of same raises for same work. And he found out that it happened again.
Yep.
And he couldn't understand
Yep. It's the
how that
bias.
happened. And I feel like that is something that is so tangible because this is someone who went in and
Hmm.
basically cleaned the slate
Hmm.
so that this way going forward
Yep.
that equal pay for equal work thing could happen. And he's the CEO
Yeah.
and it didn't happen.
Yeah. Because you can't fight that kind of bias in a one-time shot. It's a
Right.
culture change. You need to change the culture. And that, I mean, we can go a whole
Yeah,
tangent,
I
but
mean
I
that's
want
a
to make
whole
sure we get to the third one,
yeah.
which was another one of my key takeaways is when you are in leadership, when you finally barrier, you got there as a kid, you made it through college, slugged away for 20 years. Now you're in leadership. The support is just not there. The support of you as a leader trying to move the dial is not there. In fact, the opposite is true. And I mean, I can name like self-declared that you were part of my interview um,
Yeah.
group. And there were some things that were every single person I interviewed, 15 or 18 people, and that's for a qualitative analysis, that's more than enough. Every single woman who got to leadership was like, I just can't believe the amount of daggers that come my way. The challenge is we don't talk about it to each other. And it's one of the positive takeaways is these employee resource groups are incredibly, they're like the glue that binds women to each other. And this is where we talk. This is where we can exchange like, are you, are you having a challenge finding a maternity, breastfeeding room? This
Right.
is where we can have the conversation with leadership like, hey, we're losing women sometimes right after maternity leave because we just make it so inhospitable here to have the flexibility to be able to come and go, to be able to have a pumping room or an incredibly uninspired pumping room, which is one of the places I worked at, um, which had been a broom closet.
Yeah, yeah, I've
Like
heard
you
that a
are not
lot.
going to, yeah, you're not going to breastfeed. You will not. Your body will absolutely shut down in that kind of an uninspiring gray broom closet. So anyway, these are types of things that shocked me, but I was also like, yeah, I noticed it. By the time I noticed breastfeeding pumping rooms, I was past that stage.
Right.
My kids were in elementary school. And so I didn't like think about it. I didn't think I, as a leader, should go in and do something about this. And that's where I'm hoping change will happen, is that it shouldn't have to impact you for you to go do something about it.
Yeah. So, in some of my corporate work, I speak to ERGs,
Mm-hmm.
and the conversations are pretty, when I say tough, it's one of those things where they're dealing with real challenges in terms of balancing the school pickups.
Yeah.
Like the school
Yeah.
pickup is something I hear a lot about, and obviously the random doctor appointment that comes
Yeah.
up
All the time.
and all the time, and that's just the reality of it. And there's the I gotta make up time.
Yeah.
I gotta make up time because I took 2 hours to go pick up my kids
Mm-hmm.
somewhere and take them to the
Mm-hmm.
doctor during work hours, so I gotta make up the time.
Or you're up till midnight on your
Yeah.
computer.
Well, yeah, that's how
Yeah.
you're making up
That's how
the
you're
time,
making that. That's right.
right? And these are real problems. And then you have
Yeah.
companies who are like, well, why are women leaving the workforce? And
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of like they're just sitting there saying, like, is the upside worth the downside right now? Because,
Yeah.
there's so much burnout, in particular with this job market. Like, everyone's
Yes.
worried that they will be next, and
Yes.
there's not a plethora of other opportunities out there.
Yep. Yep.
So you have that compounding the stress of
Yes.
being a woman in the workplace
Mm-hmm.
and what that's creating. What would you say was the biggest surprise that you were not expecting in your research?
Well, I've touched on a few of them,
Right.
but I think, well, I will say, and one of the reasons that I pivoted my fellowship year to Black women and Latinas is that when you're a white woman, maybe, or an immigrant like me,
Mm-hmm.
um, you don't notice, you're so busy with your head down, the experiences that Black women and Latinas are having as well,
Mm-hmm.
or any, honestly, any community that's even less than white
Yeah,
women
like
in
LGBTQ or
numbers.
something like
Yeah,
that.
exactly. So the surprise for me was, you think we have it bad. Or I say we, in
Mm-hmm.
me, my case. I thought I had it like, oh, this so woe is me. Until you look at the data when it comes to gender pay gap, much worse for Black women and Latinas.
Yep.
When you look at microaggressions, harassment, when you look at lack of promotion, that was the reason that I said, okay, I didn't do enough in my PhD for this cohort. That needs to have much more focus. And the result of that year of research on the Black women and Latinas is even the research doesn't focus enough on them. And so my focus was doing a systematic analysis of the literature. And I looked at the literature and I was like, wow, you have like 300,000. If you do women in STEM, you'll get like a return of 300,000 articles in the last 10 years. And these are peer reviewed articles. I didn't want to see dissertations. I didn't want to see,
Yeah. I was going to ask you if this was peer reviewed
Yeah,
stuff.
yes, no, like New York Times articles,
Mm-hmm.
not even Harvard Business Review, pure scholarly work. As soon as you change your search terms to Black women in STEM, you get like
Right.
55,000. If you do Latinas, and of course I accounted for language, so I did
Mm-hmm.
Black women, I did
Mm-hmm.
African American women, and then I
Right. Yeah,
took
sure.
off anything that was, an outlier. I did Hispanic and I did Latina, and so the research doesn't even focus on those cohorts, much less to be able to make change happen. And my own PhD group cohort had a really beautiful blend of diversity. So the conversations that we were able to have, it's like they've been telling us the whole time, and we just in one ear, out the other, haven't really understood until you're in it, you have your academic lens on, and you're studying it. And so I look back in my career and I see when Black women left, I didn't have a minute to think to myself, like, was that systemic? Were they subjected to racism? Like, I didn't even have the knowledge to be able to have that conversation with myself and or see patterns. And that's if I had a do-over, I wish that I could have, because as
Hmm.
soon as I saw two leave, I would have maybe as a leader stopped and said, wait a minute, what's going on here? That's one of the reasons I do the work I do now is, I want to be a part of the solution. I want to be able to recognize these patterns. And, HR has a huge role in this. They should be also creating reports, producing data, talking about attrition statistics, and that kind of partnership is so important.
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes the exit interview is kind of made fun of now
Yeah.
because it's like you don't want to burn bridges unless you want to come back. So
Mhm.
no one really is like, if they do the exit interview,
Yeah.
they're not really super candid about it because they don't want to be perceived as like they can't come back.
Yeah. Well, you don't have to wait for, as a leader, for an
Yeah.
exit interview. You have
Well, no, of
eyes.
course not.
You have
But I'm just saying,
eyeballs. You know what I
right.
mean?
No, I mean, totally, right?
Yeah.
And it's interesting because I started doing this work around Amy Edmondson and the Fearless Organization. And it talks a lot about risk taking
Mm-hmm.
and the ability to speak up and
Yeah.
include, and they specifically have a category called inclusion and diversity, but it's not like in the DEI lens, and it's more of just
Mm-hmm.
like different perspectives.
Mm-hmm.
And, kind of, I've been doing that with some teams, and it's been interesting because people are like, oh, yeah, we have like good engagement scores and whatever. But they're not looking at like the range of the scores. They're not looking at how people define engagement. They're not
Yeah.
looking at any of that in terms of speaking up. And I mean, on a
Mm-hmm.
lot of these teams, you have such disparate ranges of
Yeah.
what an experience is working for a particular leader. And you're
Yeah.
like, you need to find out why some people feel really comfortable speaking up and why some people think it is like they are not comfortable speaking up.
Yeah.
And it's more than the introversion, extroversion thing.
Oh, 100%. And what's interesting for bad leaders, and one of the things that I studied was the dark triad of leadership, which is the sociopaths, the psychopaths, the narcissist, of which at the C-suite level, like over 10% falls into that category. I'd argue more than 10%.
I would say it's got to be
Yeah,
more than 10%.
it certainly feels like it, at least
We
in
might
my
also be biased
experience.
because of tech and startups and some of the crazy
Maybe,
stories that we hear in
yeah,
startups.
yeah,
So I'll admit I may have a bias because I hear, especially over these past 3 years, some of the crazy
yeah,
startup stories I've heard
yeah.
are just like beyond the pale.
Everyone knows the personalities and their lack of kindness, the narcissism, and it's tolerated. And as long as something is tolerated, you are going to get it. And of the people who sit outside of that type of behavior, I've had debates with leadership about respect and what we should have code of conduct,
Right.
about how to be respectful. And that one bad manager that I was telling you about earlier, his answer was, respect is, like subjective. And I was like, I don't think so. There's some universal levels, acceptable levels of respect in the workplace. Like if you're consistently making a pregnant woman cry during our staff meeting, that is outside the bounds of universally acceptable respect
Yeah.
ranges.
Yeah.
That is the conversations I've had in my career where I feel like you can't make this stuff up.
Oh, I
It
say that
just,
all the time. You can't
yeah,
make this shit up if you tried.
yeah.
Like so let's pivot a little bit to, you kind of alluded to this, to the work that you're doing now. You're the doctor,
I'm
right?
the
And I know
doctor.
you don't really, and I
Doctor
know you
is
don't
in.
really, the doctor is in. I know you don't throw that around, but you did
No, I
earn
try
that
not to.
PhD. Tell us about some of the work that you're doing now and what you're seeing.
So I created my own company called The STEM Woman, and I created that in service to my female counterparts. And I just want to take a minute to say female to me is anybody who identifies as woman. There's
Mm,
no guardrails, but because English language catches up usually later than, the world's an understanding of
right.
gender, I'm say female, but it's all encompassing
Hmm.
for me and anyone who identifies as woman. So for me, the goal is I don't want you to suffer. I don't want you to suffer as a leader. I don't want you to suffer in college. And so I provide a service of coaching. Um, and I'm not trying to, get rich off of this. I don't
Well,
need
whatever. There's nothing
to,
wrong with
yeah.
that.
I mean, it's for me, this is like if I wanted to go out there and, make a ton of money,
Hmm.
I'd be doing the kind of stuff I was doing before. But this is helpful. It's living by my code, which is to help other people right now. So I do provide coaching from a lot of the topics that we've talked about. For me, the goal is for you to stay in STEM, for you to navigate and to know the things that are systemic and differentiate them from the things that are like a moment in time. Or is this a place you're stuck in? And I prefer coaching people who are at the top of their game versus waiting till, you know, it is really in the abyss and trying to like pull you out of a big muddy mess. I want to get you to not even fall into that big muddy mess.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Because for the times that I've hit burnout, it is hard to pull yourself out of that.
It
And I
really
mean,
is.
it's so hard. And like the last time like therapy was involved. And I mean,
Yeah.
that was actually ended up being a great thing because I got a lot out of it.
Mm-hmm.
But would I have traded that for where I was? I don't know. Right, to
Yeah.
be honest with you, because it was in a really bad place I was in a really bad place,
Yeah.
this time like 3 years ago.
Yeah.
But I think that one of the things, though, that I learned kind of in the second half of my career was really around self care and that
Mm-hmm.
I had to make the time for it. Like, work
Yes.
was not going to magically make the time for it in terms of because they were going to take as much as I was going to give them. That's what
Mm-hmm.
I started to learn like midway through. And I'd love to hear your thoughts, right? Because we're both women of a certain age
Mm-hmm.
around the importance of self-care and like the agency where you have to make that time for self-care because that's what I talk about with my clients all the time.
Yeah. I've kind of broadened it's a great question, Jill. Thanks for asking. I've broadened my definition, my own personal definition of self-care. It used to be the things you do, the yoga that you go to. And, I would throw a lot of money at, like, I would have membership to a yoga studio, a bar studio, a gym,
Yeah.
because these places were close to my clients. And I would have the flexibility of if I'm not over there in that town, maybe I'll be in that town. And so it was worth it for me to spend the money to spread out the ability to have flexibility to jump into a gym or a studio or a class. So there was a lot of that kind of self care, which is important because when you're not physically well, you can't be mentally well, and vice versa. These things are so connected. But like they say, you can't outrun a bad diet.
Oh, I say it all the
You
time.
can't out self care a bad culture either,
Yeah.
which is new to me. This is like the past 3 years, 4 years for me. Is like no matter how much I was like, I will do my yoga, I will get my supplements, I will see, any kind of bad personal physical feeling, I'm going to go to the doctor and take care of it. That is 100% needed. But if you still go 17 hours a day to a bad job, those things, their impact is minimal compared to 100% of your work hours in a bad job with a bad boss who berates you, doesn't respect you, doesn't invite you to meetings, leaves you off of emails. Those things, you can't yoga your way out of it.
I love that you can't out self-care your way out of a shitty situation.
Yeah.
Like you have to like confront the situation.
Yeah.
And I think because I do say you can't outrun a bad diet. I say that all the time.
Yeah. I do
But
too.
but I love what you just said because I think that sometimes you have to make that realization
Yeah.
that this situation is not going to get better. Like there's a
Yep.
certain rubric that you have to go through to kind of
Yes.
be like, okay. Because the other thing, the other crutch is that people are like, oh, it'll get better once we get past this deadline. Like if I had a
Mm-hmm.
dollar for every time I heard that, I could retire and be,
Mm-hmm.
living
Mm-hmm.
in,
On a beach.
on a beach somewhere, right?
Mm-hmm.
I could be doing that. But that there's always going to be something else
Yes.
that comes up when you get past this one personal or professional milestone. I mean, is that
Mm-hmm.
something you find also?
100%. So I've had big, gnarly, hard jobs, projects. But I've also had at the same time, shout out to Terry Cole, who was my boss at Microsoft for
I
five
remember him.
years. I was able to her. She was I weaseled my way to work under her in any which way that I could. And so really hard jobs, but under a really supportive leader. And I was able to shine and I was exhausted, but in a good way. And then there's been jobs where I'm like, why did they hire me? They don't really need me. And I'm going to try to find myself, work myself out of this role because it doesn't make sense. I'm a barrier actually. And I'll make the case for like, I'll go find something else, but this isn't really good for the company to have this role. And so I've had jobs like that where then of course you don't also, it correlates with having a bad manager because they should have seen it coming and not even hired you. And now you're in this like quandary of, I'm telling the truth that this role isn't needed. I should be sort of rewarded for that because you're going to save a bunch of money. Plus, we're going to get more efficient. We can do this differently. I'm bringing my Microsoft experience to this place. This is the reason you hired me, but now you don't want to hear how it's done in other companies. So I'm really perplexed. And so then you kind of grind through this struggle, inner struggle about efficiency that you have. And I guess kind of also a truth thing is like you're telling the truth about the job, but wanting to partner, let's find something else. There's a million
Yeah.
jobs open in this company. Let's find something else that makes sense. And instead, because you were wronging that leader because they were too dumb to hire you to begin with, because this job isn't necessary, now you're in this weird, like you're making the person look bad, but you're not really, that's not intentional. You're trying to do the right thing for the company. Does that, what I'm saying, make sense?
Yeah, I call that you're trying to keep your job. You're trying to do your job instead of keeping your job.
Yes, and I don't need to, like, time is precious. We're on this
Yeah.
planet only for so long. I want to do like meaningful work.
Right.
And so I would love if an employee came to me and said, "Hey, I have found a way to eliminate my job." I'm not going to be like, "Oh, let's go fire you." I'm going to be like, "Oh my God, you're brilliant.
Yeah.
This is a person who needs to be promoted because they just saved us oodles of money because it wasn't just them, it was all the peripheral stuff that we were able to get rid of." So I think you know, your point about burnout, which led us to this conversation,
Mm.
is there's a time and place for everything. And I learned over the course of this PhD is that we are not going to be able to fight all the battles by ourselves for everyone else around. And sometimes, and I coach some leaders depending on the situation, sometimes this is just not the right place for you.
Yeah.
Sometimes you need someone to actually tell you that. Sometimes you are so dedicated that you have such high integrity that you won't do it yourself.
Yeah. So the executive coach that ironically my last corporate job hired for me,
Hmm.
she was like, this is going to end badly. She's like,
Yeah.
whether you do it or she's like, this is not going to end well. And I mean, she
Yeah.
said it in a much more professional
Yeah.
way,
Yeah.
but, and I'm still friends with her. I've had her on my show, right?
Same.
Like,
I
so
had
the thing is that like,
same.
but you sometimes just need that extra person. So,
Yeah.
Karin, you and I can go on forever about this stuff,
I love
but
it.
where can people find you?
Super easy. TheStemWoman.com.
And you're all over LinkedIn, and we'll have your
And I'm on
LinkedIn.
LinkedIn. Yes.
You are super duper responsive on LinkedIn. So we will link to all that in the show
Thank you.
notes, as well as anything that we referenced in this that people may want to nerd out on. Like I'm always
Yeah.
someone who wants to nerd out on that. Some of the work that she did in her PhD, if that's available. But
Yes. Thank you.
Karin, I'm so glad we finally got to do this,
Oh, so
and
fun.
I can't wait to have you back. And we'll talk about some other topics that I think are very germane to this that we didn't even scratch the surface on.
Thank you so much.
So I want to thank you for coming on and spending time with the community of Going the Distance with Go
Yeah.
Long. So I'm just going to wrap up the episode with a big thanks to Karin, and you'll have all of her contact information. This show was produced by John Richardson of JR Media Services. If you find value in the work that we're doing here at Go Long, you can contact us at any of the socials that we have on our website and that you'll see on this video. As a reminder, Go Long is a coaching service, and we do accountability coaching via texting because you don't need to have regular meetings when you're already not making the time to do the things that you want to be doing. And it is focused on being empathetic, pragmatic, and optimistic. And it's based on my lived experience of getting healthy. So with that, remember, it's your life, go the distance, go long.